Good evening. Welcome to the 11th story in our Middle-earth-inspired sleep stories. Tonight's episode is The Forest That Breathes, which is the first part of the Enchanted Forests segment. Let's begin. The air grew thicker as the companions crossed the threshold into the Enchanted Forests, the world around them shifting as though they had stepped into a dream. Towering trees rose into the mist above, their trunks impossibly wide, their bark glimmering faintly with hues of green and gold. The canopy was dense, blocking most of the sunlight, yet the forest seemed to create its own light, soft, ethereal, and ever-changing. Each step felt deliberate, the mossy ground beneath their feet pulsing faintly, as though the earth itself was alive and breathing. Orlen glanced nervously at the trees, their branches twisting and intertwining in patterns too deliberate to be natural. The warmth of the ring in his pocket had faded, replaced by an eerie stillness, as if the relics were unsure of the path ahead. "This place feels alive," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Cyrana, walking ahead with the keeper's staff glowing faintly in her grip, didn't turn but nodded. "It is alive," she said. The elves spoke of these forests where nature's magic is untamed and wild, beyond even their control. Adric paused, his staff glowing faintly as he knelt to examine a cluster of strange, luminous flowers growing at the base of a tree. The petals shimmered like starlight, and when he reached out to touch them, they recoiled as if sensing his presence. "The forest watches us," he murmured, his tone thoughtful. "It's ancient, older than anything we've encountered so far. And it doesn't trust us." Calen, who had been trailing behind, shivered and pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders. "Great," he muttered, his voice low. "Another place where everything either hates us or wants to test us." Orlen managed a small, uneasy smile, but the weight of the forest pressed heavily on him, its silence unnerving. As they pressed deeper, the trees seemed to close in, their roots twisting together to form natural arches and winding corridors that obscured the way forward. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint metallic tang that made Orlen's skin prickle. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though each time he turned to look, he saw nothing but shadows and the faint glow of the forest's strange light. Cyrana slowed, raising a hand to halt the group. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Orlen frowned, his hand instinctively brushing against the ring in his pocket. "Feel what?" he asked. Cyrana's gaze darted to the trees ahead, her expression wary. "The forest," she said. "It's breathing." The companions fell silent, and Orlen strained to listen. At first he heard nothing but the soft rustle of leaves, but then it came. A deep, rhythmic sound, subtle but unmistakable, like the slow inhale and exhale of something vast and alive. The sound seemed to resonate through the ground beneath their feet, growing louder and more distinct with each passing moment. "It's not just alive," Adric said quietly. "It's aware." Calen took a step back, his eyes wide. "Aware of what?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. Adric's gaze remained fixed on the path ahead. "Of us," he said, "and it's deciding whether to let us pass." The path began to shift, the mossy ground rippling as though reacting to their presence. Cyrana gripped the staff tightly, its light flaring brighter as the forest's glow dimmed. The trees ahead seemed to lean closer, their branches twisting together to form an impenetrable barrier. Orlen's pulse quickened, the weight of the ring in his pocket, growing heavier. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice tense. Cyrana glanced back at him, her expression calm but resolute. "We move forward," she said. Carefully, the group stepped cautiously toward the barrier, and as they approached, the branches began to untwist, parting slowly to reveal a narrow passage. The air grew warmer, and the faint hum of the forest deepened into a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the ground. Orlen felt a strange pull, as though the forest itself was guiding him, and he placed a hand on the nearest tree. The bark was warm and smooth, its surface pulsing faintly beneath his touch. A whisper, faint and melodic, brushed against his thoughts, too fleeting to understand but leaving behind a sense of calm. "It's letting us through," he said softly. Cyrana nodded but didn't lower the staff, her gaze sharp as she led the group into the passage. The corridor wound deeper into the forest, the trees growing taller and more intricate, their roots and branches forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Strange lights flickered in the distance, soft blues and greens that danced like fireflies but moved with a purpose that felt unnerving. Adric paused again, his eyes narrowing as he studied the glowing lights. "Spirits," he said, his voice barely audible. "Or echoes of them. The forest remembers everything that has passed through it." Calen shuddered, his steps faltering. "Let's hope it doesn't decide to remember us the wrong way," he muttered. The passage opened into a clearing, and the companions stopped, their breaths catching at the sight before them. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk wider than any they had seen, its branches spreading outward like a great canopy of stars. Its bark shimmered faintly with a soft golden light, and at its base, a pool of water glowed with an inner radiance, its surface perfectly still. The air was thick with magic, the hum of the forest fading into a deep, resonant silence that felt almost reverent. "This is it," Cyrana said, her voice quiet but certain. "The heart of the forest." Orlen stepped closer, the ring in his pocket pulsing faintly in rhythm with the glow of the tree. Whatever lay ahead, he knew it would demand more of them than anything they had faced before. The clearing pulsed with a quiet energy, the tree at its center radiating a golden light that seemed to flow into the surrounding forest. The companions stepped cautiously toward it, their eyes drawn to the pool of water at the tree's base. The surface was so still it appeared as glass, reflecting the shimmering canopy above with an almost unnatural clarity. Orlen felt the ring in his pocket pulse in rhythm with the faint hum that filled the air, its warmth steady and insistent. Cyrana gripped the keeper's staff tightly, the glow of its crystal flickering faintly as though responding to the magic around them. "This place," Adric whispered, his voice reverent. "It's unlike anything we've seen. The forest isn't just alive, it's watching us, testing us." Calen lingered at the edge of the clearing, his gaze darting to the shadows that seemed to ripple along the trees. "I don't like being tested," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Cyrana moved closer to the pool, her steps deliberate, her expression unreadable. The air grew warmer as she approached, and the light of the tree intensified, casting long shadows that danced across the clearing. "There's something here," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Something the forest wants us to see." She knelt at the edge of the pool, the crystal of the staff glowing brighter as its light refracted across the water. Orlen stepped forward hesitantly, the ring in his pocket growing hotter with each step. He knelt beside Cyrana, his breath catching as the surface of the pool rippled, unprovoked, by wind or touch. "It's reacting to the relics," Adric said, his staff glowing faintly as he joined them. "The forest knows what we carry." The ripples in the water grew stronger, forming patterns that spread outward in intricate, shifting designs. The golden light of the tree dimmed slightly, replaced by a soft, silvery glow that illuminated the pool's depths. Orlen leaned closer, his reflection disappearing as the water transformed into a window, revealing a scene that unfolded with startling clarity. A vast, tangled forest stretched into the distance, its trees darker and wilder than those surrounding them now. At its center stood a massive structure, its walls overgrown with vines, its towers crumbling yet defiant. The vision shifted, and shadowy figures moved within the ruins, their forms indistinct but menacing, their glowing eyes fixed on the relics. "This is where the relics are leading us," Cyrana said, her voice tight. "The next step in our journey." The vision faded, replaced by a swirling void of stars that reflected the companions' faces, with a clarity that felt almost accusatory. Orlen saw his own reflection staring back at him, his expression uncertain, his hand clutching the ring as though it were his only anchor. "But it's also a warning," Adric said, his tone grave. "The shadows are growing stronger. They're waiting for us." The pool stilled once more, its surface returning to perfect glass. Cyrana stood, her grip on the staff firm as she turned to the group. "We can't turn back now," she said, her voice resolute. "Whatever lies ahead, we have to face it." Calen shifted uneasily, his gaze fixed on the tree. "And what about this place?" he asked. "It's alive. It's watching us. What if it doesn't want us to leave?" The forest seemed to respond to his words, the hum in the air deepening into a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the ground. Orlen glanced at the tree, its golden light pulsing faintly as though in response. "I don't think it's trying to stop us," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I think it's testing our resolve." He stepped forward, placing a hand on the tree's bark. The surface was warm and smooth, its texture almost metallic, and a faint whisper brushed against his thoughts, too fleeting to grasp, but leaving behind a sense of calm. The tree's light flared briefly and the hum of the forest softened, its tone shifting into something more harmonious. "It's letting us pass," Orlen said, his voice steady. The group moved cautiously away from the clearing, the path ahead illuminated by faintly glowing stones that seemed to appear as they walked. The forest grew darker, the trees closing in around them, their branches twisting into shapes that cast long, jagged shadows. Orlen felt the weight of the ring grow heavier, its warmth a constant reminder of the burden they carried. Cyrana led the way, the staff's light cutting through the darkness while Adric muttered softly to himself, his staff glowing faintly as though to ward off unseen dangers. As they pressed deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and the silence became oppressive. Orlen's breath misted in the chill, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. "The forest may have let us pass," he said quietly, "but it's still watching us." Cyrana glanced back at him, her expression sharp. "Then we don't give it a reason to stop us," she said. The path began to climb, the ground beneath them growing rockier as the trees thinned slightly. In the distance, a faint glow appeared, its light flickering like a distant flame. Orlen felt the ring's pulse quicken, its warmth spreading through him like a second heartbeat. "That's where we're going," Adric said, his voice tinged with awe. "The forest is guiding us." The group moved toward the light, their steps cautious but steady. There, resolve unspoken but clear. Whatever lay ahead, they knew the forest trials were far from over. The light ahead grew brighter as the companions approached, flickering like a distant flame, but radiating an otherworldly glow that set the surrounding trees aglow in soft gold and amber hues. The path wound upward, the ground beneath them uneven and scattered with ancient roots that twisted like veins of the forest itself. Orlen felt the pulse of the ring in his pocket intensify, its warmth spreading through him like a steady rhythm urging him forward. Cyrana led the way, the keeper's staff glowing brighter with each step, its light steady and strong as though responding to the energy that surrounded them. Adric's staff hummed softly in his grip, the runes along its length shimmering faintly, while Calen hung back, his steps tentative, his eyes darting nervously toward the shifting shadows at the edges of the path. As they reached the crest of the hill, the forest opened into another clearing, this one larger and more luminous than any they had seen before. At its center stood a stone circle, its ancient pillars etched with glowing runes that pulsed in time with the light of the flames that danced in their midst. The flames were unlike any Orlen had seen, blue and green, their movements almost liquid, casting long shadows across the clearing that twisted and shifted as though alive. The air was warm, carrying a faint metallic tang that prickled at his senses, and the hum of the forest deepened into a resonant tone that vibrated through the ground. "This place," Adric said, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's older than the sanctuaries, older than the keepers themselves." Cyrana approached the circle cautiously, the light of the staff flaring briefly as she stepped within its boundary. The flames seemed to respond to her presence, rising higher and brighter, their colors deepening into richer hues of indigo and gold. "This is the heart of the forest," she said quietly, her voice steady but reverent, "the place where its magic is strongest." Orlen stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the runes that adorned the pillars. They seemed to shift and flow, their patterns forming shapes and symbols that felt familiar but remained just out of reach. "It's calling to the relics," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "They're connected to this place." The ring in his pocket grew almost unbearably warm, its pulse aligning perfectly with the rhythm of the flames. Orlen hesitated, his hand hovering over the ring as a wave of uncertainty washed over him. "What happens if we answer?" Calen asked, his voice tight, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. Adric knelt beside one of the pillars, his staff glowing softly as he traced the runes with his fingers. "The forest isn't testing us anymore," he said thoughtfully. "It's offering us something." Cyrana's gaze shifted to Orlen, her expression unreadable but sharp. "Then we decide if we take it," she said. Orlen swallowed hard, his hand closing around the ring as he stepped into the circle. The air grew heavier, the warmth of the flames pressing against his skin like a physical weight. As he stood before the center of the circle, the flames parted, revealing a pedestal of smooth stone upon which rested a single object, a seed, its surface shimmering with an iridescent light that shifted like the colors of a sunrise. The ring in his hand burned with an intensity that made him gasp, and he felt the pull of the seed like a magnetic force. "This is what it's been guiding us to," he said, his voice barely audible. Adric stepped into the circle beside him, his gaze fixed on the seed. "A gift," he said quietly, "or a test." "The seed is the heart of the forest's magic, its essence. If it's offering it to us, it's for a purpose." Orlen hesitated, his fingers trembling as he reached toward the seed. The air around it shimmered, and a faint whisper brushed against his thoughts, soft, melodic, and filled with a sense of both longing and hope. As his fingers closed around the seed, the flames flared, their light flooding the clearing in a blinding wave that forced the companions to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the clearing was silent, the flames gone, the air still and heavy with the weight of what had passed. Orlen stood at the center of the circle, the seed resting in his palm, its light dim but steady. The ring in his pocket was cool now, its pulse quiet but present, as though the seed's energy had soothed it. Cyrana approached him cautiously, her gaze fixed on the seed. "What did it show you?" she asked. Orlen shook his head, his thoughts swirling with fragments of images, visions of the spire, the shadows gathering at its base, and the relics glowing with a light strong enough to pierce the darkness. "It didn't show me," he said finally. "It chose us." The forest began to stir again, the faint hum of its magic returning as the trees swayed gently in an unseen wind. The path ahead was clear now, the glowing stones guiding the way forward into the deeper wilds. Adric looked to Orlen, his expression thoughtful. "The seed is more than a gift," he said. "It's a responsibility. Whatever it holds, it's tied to the relics, to the keepers, and to the shadows." Orlen nodded, his grip on the seed tightening slightly. "Then we protect it," he said, firmly, "until we understand what it means." The companions left the clearing, the path winding downward into the dense embrace of the forest. The air was cool, the faint hum of the forest a constant presence as they moved forward, their steps steady but their minds heavy with the weight of what they carried. The enchanted forests stretched endlessly before them, their mysteries deepening with each step, and Orlen felt the warmth of the seed in his hand, its light a quiet reminder that their journey was far from over, but their purpose was becoming clearer with each passing moment.